Hello, gentle readers. In the waning light of November 30, 2024, let's see if there's a bit more we can find in the course of the study of Logos 2000, 21st Century Foundations, with regards to what's considered the development, historically, overall, authoritatively, as with regards to matters of reason that are arrived at as intersubjective and objective apiece. I picked up a copy of Franz Brentano's book about truth and started to leaf through it and look at it a bit. And so Brentano's a very well-known logician, and he studies the philosophy in accords with the truth. And then he was reading to make an account as after Aristotle, and one thing that he arrived at is that there needs to be considered kind of like the actual vis-a-vis the potential of the infinity. Yet Aristotle already did, thousands and thousands of years ago, arrive at there must be the actual infinity. Now, it wasn't so much left in the theory as at the point, it was just established that it was so. And as with regards to then the piece of the theory of the phenomenological, that it was left a little bit more outside that for the potential infinity. The unboundedness is was usually arrived at. Delta epsilonics and the unbounded for the perfect results of the integral calculus, which themselves are as of a sort of superclassical result of the mathematics. So today I picked up a copy of Edmund Husserl's Cartesian Meditations. And this was printed in the Netherlands at some point in time. Perhaps 1970. And so what it's about, it's a translation by Dorian Cairns. And what it's about is that Husserl as well establishes the need for a teleology, and then makes for given that can't be necessarily relayed in his opinion, that it is well to be relayed that there is the whole phenomenological aspects of scientism and logical positivism that still attain to it. So long story short, from my brief survey of this text, what is arrived at is that Husserl is part of this teleology, part of this connection of the things, and has some great quotes and some readings to put this together in some pretty good ways. So let's take a look at Husserl and see if we can find something that's of relevance for us today. The published text. So the introduction, the first meditation, and so he's reflecting on Descartes' meditations. And so his first and second and third meditations, fourth, fifth, and sixth, basically represent these chapters as they may be, and then each of these has some sort of the numbered sections. For example, section 60 is metaphysical results of our explication of experiencing someone else, the inter-subjective. The traditional problems of psychological origins and their phenomenological clarification. Survey of our intentional explication of experiencing someone else. And that's when there's subjectivity is one's own perceptions, and then the idea of trying to understand somebody else is called inter-subjectivity, figuring that each as well has kind of their own objectivity, and then the inter-objectivity is that which is real, true, and concrete for everybody. Explicating the sense of the appresentation wherein I experience someone else. Establishment of the community of monads, the first form of objectivity, intersubjective nature. So here, as was mentioned quite several times in the previous installment, was Leibniz on the monadology and how that reflects very much kind of like an atomism of the observers is with regards to the state, and as well the communication of things, the monads, each one a piece, an own thing, and made up ad infinitum as of more of those, and then there's altogether one of them is a form of monism. Constitution of higher levels of intermonadic community. So Husserl definitely has a pretty thorough and reasoned account of these things from philosophy that establish what are these truths of the matters, and then that anything that comes along is attempting to be relayed really is in a sense is some part of a truth, and then insofar as it's inter-objective part of the truth. So with these 5 meditations, if not 6, excuse me, he has a section like the ego cogito as transcendental subjectivity. So the transcendental was addressed a little bit. After Maslow's hierarchy has the self-actualization and the transcendental. And that's basically beyond the top of the pyramid type of a thing. It has that, it's intended to reflect on the absolute and the infinite. And what those mean, for example, as was mentioned, Spinoza brings in, and Duns Scotus is the super, and so very natural, this infinite, that we have it as part of our accounts of these things. And then that for mathematical infinity, it involves the replete continuous domains, each complete in their own gaplessness. For Leibniz's law of continuity and postulate of perfection, as it were, principle of perfection, that there's no gaps or leaps in the continuous. And then we have line reals and field reals and signal reals as 3 different continuous domains arriving each from their own principles, as according to function theory and topology, up in the descriptive above any particular candidate for foundations. For example, geometry, arithmetic, and algebra, and analysis is after function theory and topology is built up above after types and categories and representations of cardinals and ordinals according to their functions. In set theory, the ordinary set theory, so with regards to part theory and class theory, that this reflects on the transcendental as well being that which is the holistic and universal. So it's absolutes again, in a sense. Evidence, actuality and quasi-actuality. So let's take a look here at page 58 and see what's there. What is there is section 25, actuality and quasi-actuality. All these differences, moreover, are bifurcated, / on account of a difference that extends throughout the whole sphere of consciousness and correlatively throughout all modalities of being. The difference, namely, between actuality and phantasy, as if actuality. And he spells phantasy with PH, the fantastical, the phantasmagorical, vis-a-vis the that being any matters of contingent apparition or cognition at all. For matters of theory, there's any number of theories, and to each their own, and usually people pick up and put down several theories a day. Practical working theories for a given milieu. And then with regards to the actuality and fantasy of them, is with regards to, as he puts it, modality. So modality is a phrase from our logic, and what it means is that it's as of a given coherent evaluation of everything at once. So in a given modality, you can evaluate all the facts of the logical universe in a sense, or they are all evaluated because they exist in the model of the theory. That then for a different modality is things are arbitrarily different at all. And so any what were stipulations, assertions, or conclusions may or may not exist. And so that's one of the reasons why the quasi-modal logic is considered only a particular application and not so much part of the logic per se, the real logic, as it were, of a modal logic, meaning that it's one modality, a unimodal logic. So with regards to univocity and these kinds of concepts that we have arrived at for there being an inter-subjectivity at all, just an arbitrary fantasized, as it were, imagined theory at all that is, well, though, arrives at via deductive reasoning that it can't not exist for anything else to exist, kind of a thing. So that it is so that then this fantastical, as Husserl puts it, is also the imagination. That the imagination is a key and superordinary, extraordinary aspect of mental reasoning and faculties above stimulus and response, yet could well kind of be as modeled of just mental models of things, and the idea of mind, as it's put here, as being so much part of thinking beings, that here this actuality and quasi-actuality then is further detailed by Husserl. On this side, a new universal concept of possibility arises, which has mere imaginableness in a fantasying as if something where repeats in modified form all the modes of being, starting with simple certainty of being. It repeats them as modes belonging to purely fantasy non-actualities, in contrast to the modes belonging to actuality, actual being probable or doubtful, actual being not. There's the probable and the improbable. There's assurance and measures of certainty and uncertainty. And there's things which may be surprises and vis-a-vis things which are entirely just absurd. For example, when making a journey, imagining any kind of obstacle as what may arise, vis-a-vis is something else that doesn't. One of the measures of certainty in systems that are imagined to establish a long-running service or a duty cycle is called nines. How many nines uptime will there be? So it's considered that when the availability of such a facility or service is upwards of 0.99, that means that a given 100 days or a given 100 minutes or what, that in terms of that matter of time, that 99% of the time it will be available. And so to increase the number of precisions or 3 nines results, so then getting up to 4 nines, 0.9999, and only 1/10,000th of a time, something is out of order at all, starts to reflect a very particularly high matter of assurance. Yet at some point in time, the improbability of the maintenance of these kinds of things make for, besides just a usual course of what would be so in terms of a concentrated effort, say, or other means of establishing a more thorough and wider sort of robustness and resiliency of a thing, is that it gets to the point where the very, very improbable things begin to take possible form. And so the point is that 5 or 6 nines, then it's a matter of availability and reliability that would be beyond other things that would be just so external to the concept and context that would arrive, that would entirely change and make an altogether different modality after something like that is introduced, vis-a-vis things that are just kind of unexpected, yet not really surprising. So after 5 or 6 nines, it's basically that something would be so reliable that it would almost be a guaranteed. Yet there's no such thing as a sure thing. And so it's something to be said that after 6 or 7 nines of reliability or precision or form, that at this point in time, it's as likely that a giant asteroid, for example, is pauses sometimes to have ruined the age of the dinosaurs and ended it millions and millions of years ago in the Cretaceous period or when it may so have been, will have affected to entirely change otherwise the surrounds. And so it's just one of these things to go without saying with what's probable and possible, and then all the things that do happen, that no matter what, that something will have happened. So that's just kind of something to relay with regards to this plausibility. Correlatively, modes of consciousness are likewise divided into those of positionality and those of quasi-positionality, of the as-if, of fantasying, admittedly too ambiguous an expression. And to each of these modes, there correspond both the particular mode of evidence of its meant objects and the appropriate mode of being and potentialities of making things objects evident. Here belongs what we often call clarification. Making clear is always a mode of making evident, laying a synthetic course from an unclear intending to a corresponding prefigurative intuition, namely one that implicitly contains a sense. So this is all still part of the phenomenological and doesn't have anything that for modes of reason can have arrived as like the mathematical objects are eternal. Aristotle's circular movement is eternal. Subspecie eternitatis, it's eternal. These kinds of things that these are still only matters of subjective interpretation. Strongly though, building a course for that anything is kind of this sort, as according to a sense perception of a thinking being in only a particular modality, and that there are others. If this took place as a direct intuition, given the object itself, it would fulfill and verify the existential sense of this intending. So, in that sense, that speaks to the existential and nihilistic that, well, yeah, that's always there. with regards to exploring the existential and nihilistic. The prefigurative intuition of this verifying fulfillment furnishes actualizing evidence, not indeed of the being, but of the possible being of the content in question. So that seems kind of, in a course of having already sort of a brief metaphysics and a brief account of truth, and that it's something that there is an objective always, whether or not it's available or whether or not it's distorted or whether or not that there is actually an actively antithetical or antinomous course of events in perception that prevent kind of access to otherwise its relation to other things in their modalities of their monads to be of given constituent forms consistently, constantly, concretely, completely, that here the author may or may not, and readers of this may or may not have that as a given. And so, but the author is still building basically a shell up about this otherwise placement of things, that then otherwise the same whole role of the imaginative and the fantastical as experienced is still, according to this account, quite a reasoned and usual thing. Actuality as the correlate of evident verification. So this kind of speaks to the verum and the certum and these other modes of the logicist positivism that, and if you excuse me if I say too much, I'll try to reduce it insofar as that it goes without saying that it's only generally considered a mild speech pathology, say, stuttering or the usage of and that it's as of an impromptu account compared to a studying reading of a practiced monologue that provided with prompts and so on with regards to professional voice actors and the like. These explications, moreover, involve continual study of intentional correlations. So the intentional and the extensional are two different things about equality, but here intentional also means purposeful. And so that gets into mind whether or not something is directed or undirected in the course of learning or experience or study or experiment. That the means for that is, of course, usually is generally considered that at some point in time that there is a consciousness of that, whereas at the same time some traditions of thought and the practice of structured methodologies in thought are to get away from that. For example, I was reading the other day a bit of Carlos Castaneda. So Castaneda is an anthropologist, and kind of like this one fellow we read about from the Ecology of Mind earlier in some of these talks or as after Moment in Motion. There was that Castaneda made some of his studies as of what's called the Yaqui way of knowledge, or Southwest indigenous traditional mystic experience, say. And so one of the things that is related is that it's kind of like the story that I just read, much as of some of the ideas of Zen and Zen Buddhism, with the idea of to have the no mind and what's ku and these kinds of things may involve basically a studied, unstudied approach to things. And this is sometimes considered as to be as of an open mind vis-a-vis a practiced and vigilant mind with regards to things, or the closed-minded. And also with regards to these matters of experiment and practice and study and learning and experience, that these examples go to make that sometimes it's intended when it's a conscious sort of course and it's a first-class imagination of imagination that makes for really a fuller dialectic. That other times it's basically resolves to what's called the stimulus and response of what are the trained. So the prior and posterior accounts are in effect for thinking beings, not necessarily so for feeling beings, yet it is well imagined that there's a memory always. And then besides various issues of discontinuities in what may be the experiences of thinking and feeling beings, which may lead to contradictions in the evaluation of the object sense, a word sense, a number sense, a time sense, and a sense of the continuum, has that then there's a way to bring it back around again, that there is this sort of monism and holism and that which keeps itself together, as always, an abstractly available criterion to otherwise measure events against, to find that they are, and that is how they are, consistent, complete, constant, concrete, and otherwise these matters of the objective, fulfilling the phantasy, as it were, of the imagination, that it is more than alone and absent the universe in this nihilistic abyss, the existential fullness of being, that then, as with regards to something like the unbearable lightness of being, that being feeling shallow, or besides that it's always transcendent. That this reflection on Milan Kundera's book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, has that there within that there was this kind of central concept of es muss sein, as with regards to it still having some kind of attachment, a thread, a silver thread, the time of these things. These cultural references were very, very widely read, and they would have been familiar to many, many people as of the 80s in this case, or the 70s and 60s, who read in these kinds of ways. It kind of reminds me of something like Hermann Hesse or something like that, and the period when he was very, very popular with regards to like Magister Ludi or some of these other aspects of the Steppenwolf and Siddhartha especially, that Siddhartha was a really pretty great work and represents man's conscious awakening and quest for fulfillment, and as of the experience of the ascent through, here is of Maslow's pyramid, as it were. Fourth meditation, development of the constitutional problems pertaining to the transcendental ego himself. The transcendental ego, inseparable from the processes in making up his life. Objects exist for me and are for me what they are, only as objects of actual and possible consciousness. This is a subjective account. If this is not to be an empty statement and a theme for empty speculations, it must be shown that what makes up concretely this existence and being thus for me, or what sort of actual and possible consciousness is concerned, what the structure of this consciousness is, what possibility signifies here, and so forth. This can be done solely by constitutional investigation, first in the broader sense introduced initially, and then in the narrow sense just now described. Moreover, there is but one possible method, the one demanded by the essence of intentionality and of its horizons. Even from the preparatory analyses leading us upward to the sense of the problem, it becomes clear that the transcendental ego and the psychological parallel, the psyche, is what it is solely in relation to intentional objectivities. That this is a course, and it's after a structured sort of account, and as of logicist positivism by itself. And so we're looking at this kind of as sort of as an example, one of the Atman and Brahman relations of the Vedas, meaning it's matters of perspective and projection. And for example, that there's given on that there's only one known modality, yet it's known there are others, and that this is related as being the only way to keep a course within this transcendence of the ego. One modality, that same modality, doesn't really yet accomplish to entertain that it would be as part of making it a broader modality, that the constant is change. So with regards to some usual sorts of reasons why this is at once a technical account of a mental development from the point of the observer, Husserl himself, the author of this text, in our deconstructivist account, it's not disfigurous to assign it as part of in relation to the possibility that, for example, Husserl is the Buddha in becoming, or Husserl is achieving Zen, or otherwise that Husserl is going to become something greater than he acknowledges to be a part of the course at this point in his structural development. So this is a way to look at this reading and both follow it as on a journey and observe it as a course, and that as he reaches the top of the mountain to find the guru, he becomes the guru in a sense. So this is basically just cribbing and appropriating some concepts from Eastern traditional mysticism, about though that's being part of a philosophical development and a psychological development, that it's in personal foundations. The transcendental ego is a personal transcendental ego, as with regards to foundations and the greater course here of like, well, it's got to arrive at all the rest of physics, science, and after logic and mathematics, the truth of the theory. Here is that this kind of course represents more of what's part of a personal development in terms of a thinking being, establishing for what are his means, and insofar as they may be finite, that then with regards to the infinite, whether or not he achieves this may or may not be so. And it may be so. So in that sense, we can read through the lens here of Husserl as well through the lens of all the other people who would read it, as if we were to rewind it back in time and have all these figures of development of philosophical maturity, psychological maturity, meaning the development and growth and reaching a fulfillment in nature of these things, to hear Husserl's account, which is as well having already established these meditations, and upon Descartes, through Descartes' lens, then in this also through Spinoza's lens and Schopenhauer's lens and so on. And insofar as Husserl is a 20th century philosopher. And so he's on the same course as all who follow, all who proceed. Adequately verifiable sphere of immanent time, but also world objects. So the definition of the world is, again, usually it's considered that it's a subjective definition of world. Vis-a-vis, it's a universal definition of world. So is there a definition between a world and a universe? A world might be considered as the things of overall, of all time that could ever be experienced, vis-a-vis the universe of all things that exist, whether or not they're ever experienced. So the world is not necessarily the same thing. And then when you hear things like multiple worlds hypotheses, for example, for matters of theories, when there's non-deterministic, non-causal relations, like a probabilistic foundations, it's random, or otherwise an incomplete sort of account, those can be seen as Husserl puts it, a land of fantasy and imagination. And then not that there's anything wrong with that, but not that there's anything more than that, vis-a-vis the world and our systems of the world and the wider world. It is thus an essential property of the ego, where the ego and the superego and the id are in Freudian psychology kind of considered the three components with regards to the conscious and the un or subconscious, and then the lizardian, mammalian, animal part of the brain, the ego, superego, and id. That the ego is this also usually reflected on as not being so much different from the psyche. That the psyche is as well often enough an account in the conscious, vis-a-vis that which is as regards to the subconscious accounts of feelings and motivations, vis-a-vis beliefs, kind of held motivations, and desires, which are motivations. It is thus an essential property of the ego constantly to have systems of intentionality, among them harmonious ones, partly as going on within him actually, partly as fixed potentialities, which, thanks to predelineating horizons, are available for uncovering. So these are mental models and working theories. Husserl's ego is a thinking being, a consciously, actively thinking being. Each object that the ego ever means, thinks of, values, deals with, likewise each that he ever fantasizes or can fantasy, indicates its correlative system and exists only as itself, the correlate of its system. There's to be attaching it. There are matters of considerations of how things can be when they're more than subjective. There are matters of meetings of the minds. Here it's usually considered that each individual at some point in time there's limits to communication, whereas at the same time communication can be so totally rich as the intimate or as the idealistic and the ideology, of course, that as well, that's the subjective part for the objective parts, and then that, just like the monadology, is self-similar and fractal and repeating sort of delineation of these types of things. The ego as substrate of habitualities. So this gets into personality and mode, phases. Since by his own act of generating, the ego constitutes himself as identical substrate of ego properties, he constitutes himself as a fixed and abiding personal ego, in a maximally broad sense which permits us to speak of subhuman persons. Though convictions are, in general, only relatively abiding and have their modes of alternation through modalization of the act of positings, for example, cancellation or negation, undoing of their acceptance, the ego shows in such alterations an abiding style with unity of identity throughout all of them, a personal character. So, Husserl, what I wanted to find, and what I've been kind of browsing through before and finding it quite why I wanted to read some more from this book, besides kind of a discussion of the journey of thinking. One time I wrote a blog post that was an attempt to deconstruct the actual inner operating workings of the mind as a machine. And so in my blog, rfinlison.blogspot.com, I have this very long post, and what it's about is an actual conscious effort to consider a mental introspection on the workings of the mind itself. And it was just kind of free for its own sake and part of the course of the mental development of thinking about things like infinity and continuity. Yet it is well also very much advised from having worked on models of computing programming and multi-programming and meta-programming for a long time, that therefore is to be found some more of the ideas of the ego and the consciousness of the ego. And here that Husserl is thinking about his own mind, that it's something that is variously accessible in many kinds of ways. Internal dialogues, the internal questions, all these kinds of things are considered as part of each own person's own ego that they have themselves, and they can imagine for others, and they experience for themselves, and they can imagine for themselves. And then the fifth meditation gets into the inter-subjectivity and how it's possible to experience the experience of someone else. And then that's usually matters of communication, or it's matters of observation. And it could as well be matters of intimacy, as mentioned, or as well matters of the ideology. And then otherwise it's just kind of a subjective treatment of the idea of beings, thinking and feeling beings, and as a study in the ideas of how mental models and working theories, how those would be so to be. Well, the light is fading pretty well. I suppose if I was like Abraham Lincoln, I would light a candle on the back of a shovel to read my schoolwork in the late hours of the night, and these other kind of apocryphal stories about what he did to broaden his mind as a youth and young man, and make for himself a working milieu where the objects of language, and particularly the textual and discourse, were under his command. Lincoln's letters has that you can find many volumes of Lincoln's correspondence, and he's a pretty valuable guy and very polite. It's a little bit different, the art of such matters these days, than it was then. Reduction of transcendental experience to the spheres of ownness. So here it seems to be speaking to the idea of coming back down the mountain and what can be brought with it. If the transcendental constitution of other subjects, and accordingly the transcendental sense of other subjects, are in question, and consequently a universal sense stratum that emanates from others and is indispensable to the possibility of an objective world for me is also in question, then the sense of other subjects that is in question here cannot as yet be the sense. Objective subjects exist in the world. As regards method, a prime requirement for proceeding correctly here is that first of all we carry out inside the universal transcendental sphere a particular kind of epoch with respect to our theme. For the present, we exclude from the thematic field everything now in question. We disregard all constitutional effects of intentionality relating immediately to other subjectivity, and delimit first of all the total nexus of that actual and potential intentionality in which ego constitutes within himself a particular ownness. So this is nice that he intends to reflect it, that there's a mental lever. It's a machine. It's an advantage he has over the entire the universe of these objects he's considered, as with regards to then how they could be so much so the very objective, yet in this delimitation he's made of them, that it's part of his subjectivity, his ownness of his ego. This reduction to my transcendental sphere of particular ownness, or to my transcendental concrete I myself, by abstraction from everything that transcendental constitution gives me as other, has an unusual sense. He has an object sense of the world sense in a sense. In the natural, the world accepting attitudes I find differentiated and contrasted, myself and others. If I abstract in the usual sense from others, I alone remain. But such abstraction is not radical. Such aloneness in no respect alters the natural world sense, experienceable by everyone. So he's kind of describing that there's multiple considerations of world sense. And so then that I would usually leave that out of what are these personal senses of the mental faculty, the object sense, number sense, word sense, time sense, and sense of the continuum. That as well, though, he reflects that this would usually be called a part of the philosophy, a philosophy called objectivity or objectivism, where the idea is that there's the objectivism is a very strong philosophy, and what it's arrived at is by the powers of mental reasoning and faculty that it's accumulated enough experience and the surrounds and the accords that it's always been right, or it's achieved to arrive at that, and something can be unfailing or never wrong about it in the same kind of sense. So objectivism seems to be a little bit what here Husserl has arrived at. The naturally understood ego. Well, I'll put this down for a moment and maybe pick it up again a little bit later date. And as the early evening progresses here in this far northern climate, it arrives at a pretty early part of the day. Another thing I want to look at for a while is this is my Handbook of Chemistry and Physics. So what this is a book from the Chemical Rubber Company Press, and it's very, very famous. The Handbook of Chemistry and Physics. And my copy here is the 79th edition. It's from 1999. And so opening the front leaf cover, there's a periodic table of the elements with the new notation and the previous IUPAC form, the CAS version, the atomic number, the symbol, the 1995 atomic weight, electron configuration, oxidation states. That's not so much usually included, but it's very relevant to otherwise the ionization and the potentials of all these elements of this wonderful construct called the periodic table of elements. It says the new IUPAC format numbers the groups from 1 to 18. The previous IUPAC numbering systems and the system used by the Chemical Abstract Service, CAS, are also shown. For radioactive elements that do not occur in nature, the mass number of the most stable isotope is given in parentheses. So the IUPAC is the International Union of Practicing and Applied Chemists. And it is for them and about them that so much of the nomenclature as of, for example, naming arbitrarily large and long compounds with words that begin to fill way, way beyond the English language. Hundreds and hundreds of syllables and letters. Hundreds and hundreds and thousands to arbitrarily many in length words naming compounds, where compounds are as of molecules or as of the assemblages of atomic species which arrive at being a thing. So the Chemical Rubber Company Handbook of Chemistry and Physics, and it's a press mark, or it's a publishing house, and then the CRC also publishes a bunch of other great works, like the Table of Integral Series and Products. When I found that, I was much amazed and astounded to find that in one place, and there was a time and place when it was the only place where it could be found all these different things about things. That is great. So anyways, the CRC Press is one of the greater marks in scientific publishing. And then this book, the CRC Handbook, has got like about 1,000 pages in it here. Let's see. Up after elasto-optic, electro-optic, and magneto-optic constants, which are all these great many tables and measured values. So this is up in section 12-163. Doesn't really say how many. Here's appendix A85. The Maclaurin formula, exponential. That there's a great summary of mathematical tables to go along with all these things. That there's thousands of pages in this work, and many of them are filled with these tables and more tables and cross categorizations and extended listings about molecular formulas, their names, diethylbenzene, cymene. You don't hear about that very much. Isobutylbenzene. The organic compounds have a particular thing going on with resonance theory about the benzene radicals in benzene rings. It's called organic chemistry usually. Here we have things with regards to delta H degrees in the kilojoules per mole of the crystalline, liquid, and gaseous forms. These molecular formulas, this being the table of the standard thermodynamic properties of chemical substances. It goes on for dozens and dozens of pages, if not quite 100. Most extended tables, by the time they reach too far, are just a little bit beyond what would be reasonable. But it's something like, according to the second law of thermodynamics, so much behavior is kind of defined with regards to the enthalpy of fusion and all these matters of reaction, that it does end up being a thing. And there's crystallographic data on minerals. And so in a greater light, it's something to be just kind of reviewed at some time and flip through a little bit what's going on in here. Physical and optical properties of minerals. Wow. There's all kinds, the mineralogy itself is a great study on all kinds of naturally occurring or what may be found in various unique places about the earth according to their unique origins. It's kind of like the other day they discovered a meteorite. And this meteorite was denser and heavier than it's possible to be. So how could that be? And the idea is that it's sort of associated with some of these notions of heft here. It's kind of like frozen heft, basically, according to the energy and configuration of it, vis-a-vis like super heavy elements and this kind of things, which is a different sort of course. And that it's usually considered that atomic elements increase in density as they go up in atomic number. And it's usually so, but it's not exactly so. with lead and gold and uranium being very heavy and dense. Magnetic susceptibility of the elements and inorganic compounds. Neon, negative 6.96. Most of these values are positive, and then there's various ones that have a small negative amount in magnetic susceptibility. Density of molten elements and representative salts. So the salts, as with regards to the halides and all the various possibilities in chemistry to make for reactions and tests, is according to structure and form, is a very part of a very, very rich field, and something that is above physics, because the talk here has been mostly about like fundamental physics and elementary physics, and then also things like classical motion and the laws of physics. That all the stuff in the realm above this is chemistry, has many, many, many disciplines associated with it all throughout. Physical constants of inorganic compounds. Wow, this is great. Now, I haven't reviewed this for quite a while. In fact, I've been using it as sort of a stand for a guitar amplifier, but I've been dusting it off here, and I'm glad to just find it here that most all of these values in this book are the same. They are the same now as they ever have been. But then there is, as with regards to the running constants, for example, when it was mentioned in the reading about the periodic table, it was the 1995 value, that those do change over time, and they affect the entire kind of regime of the standard units of things. There's a great expository account then to read on the elements. And so, whereas those pages were full of tables, these pages are full of 100 and 1,000 word paragraphs about the elements. So I'm going to look to be reading these a bit more, because one imagines that this book is supposed to be the sole source, the handbook of all matters of knowledge in chemistry. This was considered at some point in time to be the greatest book in all of science. So it's often, of course, in somebody's scientific development, I'd imagine, to get their own copy of the Handbook of Chemistry and Science and Physics. Handbook of Chemistry and Physics. Here, for example, they have a modern edition today. And it just helps to reflect that via its heft and its content and the density of it as a work, and it's designed for being read in low light conditions, and all these diagrams of the structural formulas of organic compounds, and all these different things that go into what it is as a compendium of all the data and of collected physics and chemistry. It's just an example that here the only other book that I have that's about this big is the Telecommunications Reference Manual, but its pages are a lot thicker. And then I have, like, for example, a Bible about this big, but then again I also have one that's not much more than a large pack of gum, basically, or a small paperback book, or a pack of cigarettes, usual sizes to affect to reflect whether something can be carried in the pocket. So this sort of tome, the Handbook of Chemistry and Physics, these days on one most imagined available digitally and electronically, is something that, it goes without saying, would be part of any sort of library of scientific and physical knowledge for almost a century. Well, gentle readers, that will be about the reading for today. And I'm later just going to turn on some lights and look and browse at this Handbook of Chemistry and Science and Physics a little bit, to gain some ideas from it, to revisit it after 20 years of it just kind of being a stand for my guitar amplifier. Thusly, what's to be arrived at is a little bit of then a recollection of what's been going on in Logos 2000. So as the light fades this November 30th of 2024, and the year is coming also to a close, it's already, according to our 12 months, 11 months through, then it'll also be reaching towards the first quarter of the 21st century coming to a close. And so the 21st century, for a long time, especially in the 20th century, was to be this sign of when all these great things that are matters of science, and typically framed in flying cars and cures for what were then incurable diseases and such, has that it's kind of well underway, and how does so, and it's kind of flown past, and it's been a time of great prosperity and growth and development all over the world. One can look at all sorts of matters of change that have made it so that the means of production were able to really grow. Then at the same time, then there are many things going on with the world to worry about. For example, whether the abiogenetic origin of oil is a thing, and now that molten iron is leaching out of the core of the earth, because that's a thing, or that even the mass transit systems on the earth have actually spun it around a little bit, where the usual idea is that, well, the earth is flat and it's motionless, so just compute how long it takes a train to get from Chicago to New York. That is like, well, once you run it enough times, it actually starts spinning itself back forward. That these are kinds of things with regards to it's a one world world, and vis-a-vis everyone's own personal and practical experience and working theory of it. How's that then? In the 21st century, we've arrived at the logical positivism, and scientism has arrived at some great things. And then for physics, this physics is an atomic physics, and it's a molecular physics as well. So we kind of know that structural chemistry is above atomic chemistry, and it's not entirely defined by it. Yet as well, that is most thoroughly grounded, and fundamentally our theory lives as of it. But we do have here a particle wave resonance duality dichotomy, and that's seen as a needful thing. That 120 years ago, it's been about, or 130, since the advent of electron physics and the great success of mass spectroscopy and the ultraviolet catastrophe making the electron physics so that we'd have quantities that added up with regards to so many of them, and according to the ratios in the different regimes, the electromagnetic, the kinetic, and the matters of the radionuclear, then as well, the theory has a lot to come on to that. So some of the things that were part of the theory and the development, like the 1920s, they came up with the relativity in a fourth dimension for time, and time is kind of like not necessarily a constant and monotone property, not modal, as it were. Has at the same time that made for things like after quantum indeterminism, which was just because it was so super classical that it would have to be infinite to be fast enough to make for so how things are, and that mathematical models didn't find that very tractable. Has that there's again as well that it will be. And so many of the accounts that then came after philosophy and psychology, and the addressal of things that, since scientism and logical positivism had argued so strenuously to arrive at some of the things that were supports of metaphysics and reason and truth for itself, and merely truth, a merely metaphysical account, how to arrive at instead that there was a total imaginative fantasy of the multiple worlds, as it were, vis-a-vis there being the possibility of otherwise that our phenomenological is equipped with a mental phenomenology that includes at least one real infinity, and that there are others, and these kinds of things. That in the 21st century, then, the idea here, this Logos 2000, is that the foundations are being revisited. And so then as they're revisited, it's not that they're revised, it's just that they're disclosed and uncovered lessons learned in the far future of those times to put them back together again. So kind of like when there's a discussion of something like revisit Heisenberg, Hubble, and Higgs. Well, they were right at the time, but now we know that they weren't right now, and so why, and how do we fix them up again? Revisiting the same things, or Fadio Lesage's theory of gravity, Fitzgerald's theory of gravity, and those being two entirely different things, but one about the push gravity instead of pull gravity, and here of fall gravity, and the other about space contraction is length contraction and time dilation, and here is about space contraction linear and space contraction rotational. That these are taking the lessons of like Einstein and Newton, and taking the lessons of these much lesser known figures that are still in the balance just as critical to arrive at this sort of 21st century foundations as not just, again, just adding a 0 or adding a 9, because at some point in time that doesn't make sense anymore. And furthermore, we can't really say that it happens in terms of, probabilistic models of machine learning that have entirely possibly skewed and non-existent accounts as what really made for them. That there's lots to then be seen as arrived at here, because from my perspective, there's some great improvements to the theory overall. I feel like, if anything, that there's what can be said is we still have all the results of science today and ways to look at it, which take a lot of the different things that cause so much confusion and even panic, and make it so that those were merely reactionary possibles explored by so many thinkers at once, mostly, unfortunately, probably expected to kind of not arrive at what the retrenchment was, that looking forward, that there was never a kind of a thorough looking back. So then it can be said that much of the ideas of the possibilities of the greater, fuller, wider dialectic are able to then just revive all these ideas that are just as good and sharp as they ever were, these tools in the shed, just gathering dust in this Hilbert's infinite living working museum of mathematics and its adjunct physics to arrive at these sorts of things. Well, general readers, gentle readers, general or gentle, but usually gentle readers, and fellow earthlings, I shall so hope then that this finds you well today. I was just trying to kind of cap off what was the Logos 2000 of these first few episodes, and getting to where it's arrived at, that the notions of the cyclic metaphysic built up into Movement and Motion, that series came to be more thoroughly fulfilled, and then also to read into more of the philosophical literature specifically, to arrive at as well as same modality where they're all fulfilled, insofar as then that it's also made sure that there's given an account of the imaginative, and that these great accounts like Husserl's in the modern day, having to deal with existentialism and nihilism, can as well be seen as accounts and conscious accounts of fitting and fulfilling otherwise these matters that abstract objectivism, which Husserl encounters, experiences, and relays, and as to others, that thusly there'll be a firmer foundation to begin to figure out for this mental lever how to lift for it the foundational enterprise that there already was and is, and for then the thinkers of these sorts of courses in foundations to have their own understandings of their own greater strengths in a world of logicist positivism, as it were, and the least sort of attachment to ontological commitments and picking up and putting down theories, that as well they can have their own that fully encompasses all what's posited as the reasoning of those, and to have their own, of course, with the necessary caveat, the warning that that doesn't guarantee it to be right by any means. It just guarantees that it exists, and that it's one's own ego to right to fulfill its own narrative, in a sense. That there is free will, of course, as a matter of non-falsifiable fact vis-a-vis otherwise a thinking being, or that there is at least one thinking being in the universe, vis-a-vis the unmoved mover, these kinds of things. And yet that it is well connected, and there's an entelechy of the ability to experience as of oneself, and as well when experiencing the experiences of others, to be conscious of that and to be aware of these things. Well, that said, then this brings us up to about the hour mark, so I'll close in this dusky dusk of Logos 2000 today as an objective view, if I knew there was one. Good day.